Thank you so much for jumping in. I am so appreciative for every single one of you and the time that you have taken in order to progress yourself further into the life that God has for you. Over the last couple of weeks, we have done a series of changing my story. And that requires a lot of work. It requires an intense amount of leaning into who you have always been, but it always also it requires for you to lean into who you are becoming. And for many of us, that means that there are some things and some people and some places that we have to, in essence, leave behind. Identifying those things can be hard. Today, I want to talk about leaving a part of ourselves behind. There is a scripture in Revelation chapter number 2, Revelation chapter 3, verse number 2 that says, "Be watchful and strengthen the things which remain." That's all I want to read from that scripture. Be watchful and strengthen that which remains. When we read other versions of the scripture, it says, "Wake up and strengthen that which remains." Wake up, which would refer or would indicate that there are parts of us that have been asleep, that there are parts of us that are currently not conscious. There are parts of us that have become overwhelmingly in this cycle of not being aware and alert and not recognizing the wiles or the attacks of the enemy in order to hold you hostage or to keep you stuck. You know, the other day, I was trying to tell someone about a movie, and we were watching the movie while I was trying to tell them. And I missed bits and pieces of the movie because I was trying to share with them things about that movie. And it really stuck out to me how there are times in our life where we can become so fixated on fixing people and places or things around us that we lose sight of our own promise. We lose sight of our own forward trajectory. There have been times in my life, and I'm pretty sure for yours as well, where you can be so involved in the process of helping another person, or you can be so involved with trying to push or trying to create the atmosphere for another person to evolve and grow, that we can become asleep to our own growth process and we can lose things in that transition. I don't know if you have ever been on a job or if you've ever been in a relationship where you have found that there have been some concerns that have arisen. And you have jumped into place to try to help those concerns. Meanwhile, you have placed your own dreams on a shelf. You have placed your own desires on a shelf. You have placed your own growth on a shelf so that you can become involved with helping others. There is this scripture that I want to point out in First Corinthians chapter 3. I'm going to read just the very first verse of this scripture in chapter 3, verse number 6, and it says, "I planted the seed, Apollos watered it, but God has been making it grow." I want to keep reading. Verse number 7 says, "So neither the one who plants nor the one who waters is anything, but only God who makes them things grow." I think so many times in our life, we can become so involved in the process of desiring to see the things of God come to pass on this earth. Whether it is a promise that God has given you, or whether it is a hope that God has placed in your heart, or whether it is another individual that God has placed around you, or a job that you are doing. We can become so involved, and our ego can take on the position of believing that it is our job to change it, that it is our job to plant the seed, and to not only plant the seed, but to till the ground and to water the ground and then to collect on the harvest. I want to release you to believe today and to understand that your job is to simply do what God has placed you there to do, and not to hold so much of your mind space and your heart space in believing that you have to be a part of every part of the process in anyone or anything's life. You see, we have to believe that God knows with his masterful design how to plant people where he needs them planted in other people's lives. That we can let go of a part that is not our job and believe that in our absence that God can do whatever is necessary in order to get the job accomplished. After all, it is faith that has to step up in our lives. That we can believe that, God, I have done my part, and now I'm going to leave the rest up to you. This may be with your children. This may be with your spouse. This may be with your job. This may be in a relationship with friends, or even with a family member, a sister, a brother, a cousin, that you have invested so much of your space, of your heart, into trying to elevate them or trying to help them to grow to the next level, that you can become overly fixated on trying to do the whole part of the process, as opposed to leaning into God, having faith and resting and saying, God, the rest is up to you. And I am okay standing in the position of trusting you. Sometimes trusting God in processes, sometimes trusting God with people, places, and things, especially when we love them, it can become challenging. But we can lose a part of our own identity in trying to help those that are around us. We can lose a part of our emotional capacity trying to change and fix and help others to evolve that are around us. I believe that if we lean into just showing up to do our part, that part could be just being forgiven, just being kind, just being loving, just being yourself in front of someone else and allowing them to see the glory of God that is on your life, the goodness, whether they can understand it or comprehend it or not. We've got to lean back in God to a position of trust, knowing that, God, you can do the rest, that this isn't my job to do, that I cannot become so involved with the process that I pushed God out of the way and I begin to take over. I can think of how many times in my life I have taken over a part of the process. I have taken over and gotten all in God's way as I have begun to believe that it was my power and my might that could shape a person's mind, or that could help a person to see where they're wrong, or that could help a person to see where they need to grow or develop. I have had to lean and trust into God. Now, this didn't come just as a matter of fact, but this is something that has grown with me throughout childhood. This is something that has grown with me throughout life. I was talking to someone the other day, and in that conversation, I was able to identify the place where this rose up in my life. I was able to identify the place where I began to believe that it was my job to fix people, that it was my job to fix the things and the places that were around me. And I have been in this process for over 20 years, where I have always tried to overwhelm myself with fixing others and pleasing others. I have always tried to overwhelm myself with showing where others need to be corrected and where they need to be fixed. And I have overwhelmed myself to a place of it being a weight upon me. Some of you right now, you're having a heavy weight upon you because something or someone has not evolved to believe or to be what you thought that they should be at the timing that you thought they should be in. And so it becomes a weight upon you as you go to sleep in some instances, praying and hoping and wishing that God would change it while you were sleeping. As you wake up in the morning and you test to look to see, God, is there change? Is it taking? Is it working? Today is a day where I want to release you from taking on parts of the process that are not yours. Today, I want you to be released from trying to take the whole entire job on yourself, to believe that this is your job to handle. Today, I want you to lean in and rest completely and wholly and totally in the comfort and in the knowledge of knowing that you can show up to be your authentic self in people's lives, and it will naturally plant the seeds. And then you have to take your hands off. so that God can do the change? Is it possible, friends, that today, is it possible that maybe it hasn't happened yet? Maybe the change has not occurred yet because you've been in God's way. Is it possible that maybe it has not changed yet because you're still trying to consider what else you can do? You're still trying to figure out where you can come into play and what you can say and how you can put it in a different language or in a different tone, and maybe the person, place, or thing will get it. Maybe it hasn't happened yet because you've gotten in God's way. Maybe it has not happened yet because you have taken over the place that God says, I want to work. And this is your permission today to lean more into your own development, to lean more into preparing yourself for what God has for you. As Revelation chapter 3 says, wake up. Come out of the trance, come out of the overworking, come out of the hard place of trying to fix everything and everybody around you, and just rest in the comfort and knowing that you, as you are, and what you do naturally, your gifts, your tools, your talents that are naturally exuding from you, will do the job that God has called you to do. And maybe it's someone else's position that God has aligned or assigned to that person to water the seeds that you have planted. And maybe it's not your job to see the harvest. Maybe it is your job to see the harvest. But I want you to rest in your position today and let God be God and you take a back seat. Maybe things will shift and maybe things will change once you learn to totally surrender to his plan over this. I pray that this message has encouraged you and that this message has blessed you. I pray that you have heard God give you permission to let God be God over your life, over your circumstance, over your situation. I pray today that you lose the overworking, the overindulging in trying to fix everything that's around you, and that you rest and trust that God has the ability and the power to do things magically and wonderfully and awesomely. After all, this is the same God that put the sun and the moon into space, and those things have never collided. After all, this is the same God that created man and created life that we see and did it so masterfully that things just work together in concert without man's approval. You remember in the book of Genesis, he created things for man, before man, and he didn't need us in order to create those things. And so sometimes we've got to rest back and understand that he doesn't need us to do every part of the process. But yet, in essence, we can still rest and trust in him and fully believe that God is doing all things well. I pray that this message has encouraged you and that this message has blessed you today. Please do me a favor, jump over to YouTube and subscribe to that channel today to make sure that you are a part of every one of the messages that I put out. Also, if you are on any of the other apps and you would love to become connected and to partner, thank you so much for considering doing that. You can jump over to my website as well, and you can subscribe, www.kingcurtis79.com. Please jump over and subscribe, and you'll be able to see every update there as well. So thank you so much for jumping in. For those that consistently and constantly sow into this ministry, please see the link that is somewhere on your screen now, and I welcome you to sow there. Otherwise, thank you so much for jumping in. I pray that you have been blessed and that you have been encouraged. And know that I am here with you and that I am loving on you. And we're going to get to the other side of this. God bless you today.